Welcome to Haven Stories channel. There are places in America that don't show up on any map. Places the locals don't talk about, not because they've forgotten them, but because remembering hurts. Old mining towns buried under the weight of mountains and time, where the ground still breathes smoke and the wind carries stories no one should hear twice. I've spent years chasing ghosts across these back roads, filming, exploring, trying to find what's left of the people who built this country and were swallowed by it. But some nights I think it isn't me who's finding them. It's them finding me. I never thought fear could be quiet. But out there, somewhere in the folds of the Appalachian ridgelines, fear doesn't scream. It hums. I never thought fear could be quiet. But out there, somewhere in the folds of the Appalachian ridgelines, fear doesn't scream. It hums. It sits beneath the surface like the echo of something that used to be alive but isn't anymore. You feel it before you understand it, in the way the air stops moving, in how your headlights catch faces that aren't really there. That was the kind of fear that started the night I drove my old Volkswagen Westphalia into the heart of West Virginia coal country. I wasn't there for thrill or content. At least that's what I told myself. I'd been camping across the East Coast, filming forgotten places, looking for meaning in the way America's backroads decay. But there was something about those mountains that pulled me in deeper. Maybe it was the stories I'd heard about miners who never made it home, about whole towns buried by time, or maybe it was just me trying to outrun the noise of my own life. The last real town I passed through was Thurmond. Population 5, maybe 6. A couple of porch lights, a half-collapsed gas station, and a man in a camo jacket who watched me fill up my tank like he already knew I didn't belong. I asked him if there was a campground anywhere nearby. He pointed toward the black outline of the hills and said, "You'll find plenty of places to park out there. Just don't go past the second bridge." I laughed a little. I thought it was a joke. But when I asked why, he didn't smile. He just shook his head and said, "Road gets strange after that." It was close to sunset when I hit the first bridge, a rusted steel truss over a stream that smelled like sulfur. My phone had already lost signal. I turned off the main road and followed a gravel trail that snaked deeper into the hills. The trees closed in tight, their branches scraping against the roof of my van. I drove slow, windows cracked, the cool autumn air carrying the faint scent of coal dust and wet rock. The campground, if you could call it that, wasn't on any map. It was an open clearing beside a creek with the remains of what used to be a picnic table and a couple of old fire rings half buried in weeds. I parked, set up a small lantern on the dashboard, and let the engine tick down to silence. The quiet hit me like a wall. No traffic, no insects, no night birds, just the distant rumble of water moving through rock. That silence should have been peaceful, but it wasn't. It felt like the kind of quiet that comes after something stops breathing. I remember sitting there, eating from a can when I first noticed the sound, a low, rhythmic tapping coming from the trees across the creek. At first, I thought it was a branch knocking in the wind, but the wind wasn't blowing. The rhythm was steady, deliberate. Tap, 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 tap. I called out, half joking, "Anyone out there?" No answer. The tapping stopped. That should have been the moment I left, packed up, turned around, ignored whatever curiosity was starting to burn in my chest. But I told myself it was nothing. I was in coal country. Old shafts ran under these hills for miles. Maybe it was loose rock shifting. Maybe it was a pipe knocking. That's what I wanted to believe. As darkness thickened, fog began to roll down from the ridge, silvering the air around my headlights. I turned off the engine to save power and sat in the driver's seat, scrolling through old photos on my phone, anything to anchor myself in something normal. That's when I caught movement in the corner of my eye. Across the creek, just beyond the fog, a figure stood near the edge of the trees. Not moving, not approaching, just standing. I couldn't make out details, just the pale suggestion of a body, tall and thin, like someone wearing an old mining coat. For a few seconds, I froze. My breath caught, every muscle wired tight. Then, as quietly as it had appeared, the figure turned and slipped back into the fog. I told myself it was just a trick of the light. Maybe my headlights hit an old signpost or tree stump. That's what fear does. It makes your brain rewrite the truth so you can keep breathing. But something in me knew I wasn't alone. I tried to sleep in the van that night, but every sound, every creak of the chassis, every drip from the trees made my pulse spike. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. The tapping. Louder now. Closer. Tap. 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 It was coming from behind the van. I grabbed my flashlight, slid the side door open, and stepped into the cold night. My breath fogged the beam as I swept the light across the clearing. Nothing, just mist and trees. I circled the van once, twice. No footprints, no movement. Then, from the other side of the creek, the tapping started again. It wasn't random anymore. It was a pattern. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 1 tap. Over and over, like a signal. My chest tightened. It reminded me of the way miners used to communicate underground, with knocks and signals when the tunnels collapsed. I stood there listening, heart thudding against my ribs until the sound faded back into the fog. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine idling, headlights cutting through the mist, waiting for dawn. When the first light broke over the ridge, I packed up fast. But before I pulled out, I noticed something strange. Across the creek, right where that figure had stood, the earth had been disturbed. The grass was matted down in the shape of footprints leading toward a narrow, overgrown path. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I decided to follow it. The path wound uphill, slick with moss and old shale, until it opened onto what looked like the remains of a town, or what was left of one. Rows of foundations, a few stone chimneys, the shell of a church with no roof. The air was heavy, still, and thick with the smell of burnt coal and rain. At the edge of the square stood a rusted sign barely legible under decades of corrosion. Welcome to Ashburn, Estem 1898. Ashburn. I'd read about it once, a mining town that had vanished after a methane explosion in the 40s. Dozens dead, the rest moved away. No one ever rebuilt. But there was something else, something off. In the center of the ruins was a small metal hatch half covered in vines. The edges were blackened, melted, like it had been exposed to fire. When I crouched to look closer, I saw scratch marks around the rim, deep gouges in the metal, like someone had tried to claw their way out. I don't know what made me touch that hatch. Maybe curiosity, maybe the kind of arrogance that comes when you think you're still in control. The metal was cold, even under the morning sun, and when I brushed the vines aside, a wave of air came out that didn't belong. It wasn't just stale, it was thick, wet, metallic, and faintly sweet, like rust mixed with something organic. I jerked my hand back. For a long moment, I just stood there, listening. The woods around me had gone dead, silent again. Not a bird, not a breeze, just that same emptiness pressing against my eardrums. Then came the tapping. Not distant this time, from below. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 1. Exactly the same pattern as before. I staggered backwards, staring at the hatch like it might move. My heart was hammering so hard it made my vision pulse. Every part of me wanted to run, to get back to my van, start the engine, and never look back. But something else anchored me there. A faint, almost imperceptible sound beneath the tapping. Breathing. I dropped to one knee and pressed my ear to the hatch. The metal was vibrating softly. Then I heard it again, a whisper of air, labored and uneven, echoing up from below. There was someone, or something, under there. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an animal trapped underground, maybe a trick of the wind through some collapsed mine shaft. But then I noticed something that froze me completely. Carved into the metal, almost worn away by time, were words. Still here. I stumbled back so fast I tripped over a piece of broken concrete. My flashlight clattered against the ground and rolled into a puddle. That sound must have echoed because a moment later the tapping stopped and something scraped against the underside of the hatch. Not a knock, a drag, slow, heavy, like fingers or nails running across the inside of the door. That was it. I turned and ran. I didn't care about my gear, the video, any of it. My only thought was getting back to the van before whatever was down there found another way out. The trail felt longer on the way back, and halfway down I started to hear it again. Not tapping, but footsteps matching mine. When I stopped, it stopped. When I ran, it followed. I burst out of the tree line, tripped over a root, and nearly face-planted into the mud by the creek. My van was still there, half covered in fog, but something about it looked wrong. The driver's side door was open. I was sure I'd locked it. Inside, my things had been moved. My sleeping bag was unrolled, my lantern turned on. And on the fogged-up inside of the windshield, someone had drawn a handprint. The fingers were long. Too long. I slammed the door shut, started the engine, and threw it into reverse. Gravel sprayed behind me as I backed up toward the road, my pulse so loud I could barely hear the engine. But just before I hit the first bridge, I glanced into the rearview mirror. Someone was standing in the middle of the road. That same tall, thin figure, the one I'd seen by the creek. The Volkswagen's headlights caught its outline in the fog. For a moment, it didn't move. Then it raised its arm, slow, deliberate, and pointed back toward the hills I'd just come from. My body went cold. I hit the gas and didn't stop until I was miles away, tearing down mountain roads that twisted like veins through the forest. When I finally reached a small diner off Route 19, my hands were still shaking. The waitress poured me coffee and asked where I'd come from. I told her the name Ashburn. She froze, her face draining of color. "You shouldn't say that name," she whispered. "That place burned from the inside. Nobody goes there." I tried to tell her what I saw, the hatch, the figure, the sound, but she just shook her head. They sealed the mines after the explosion, but some of the shafts ran under the town. They say the fire never really went out. It's been burning underground for 70 years. Every few years, someone goes missing up there. Hikers, explorers. The ground gives way, or worse. She didn't need to say what worse meant. I stayed in that diner for hours, too scared to get back on the road. I kept replaying the sound of that tapping, the smell from under the hatch, the handprint on the glass. It didn't add up. None of it did. Eventually, exhaustion won. I drove to a nearby rest area and parked under a flickering streetlight. I remember thinking that I'd just close my eyes for a minute. When I woke up, it was still dark, but the van wasn't where I left it. The light was gone. The sound of the highway had vanished. I sat up fast, looked out the window, and realized I was back by the creek, the same clearing, the same fog. The keys were still in the ignition. The engine was off. My phone was dead. Panic isn't even the right word for what hit me. It was a kind of collapse. Like my mind couldn't hold reality together anymore. I threw open the door, stumbled into the clearing, and shouted into the fog. No echo. Just the tapping. Closer than ever. This time it came from inside the van. I turned slowly, heart in my throat, and saw the rear hatch trembling, like something was pressing against it from the inside. The metal flexed. Then it went still. For a long moment, nothing happened. The fog thickened until I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The creek sounded louder now, rushing and hissing, like it was whispering something I couldn't understand. Then, faintly, I saw movement, figures forming in the mist, dozens of them. Men in old miners' gear, faces blackened with soot, eyes hollow. They weren't walking toward me. They were standing around the hatch in a circle, heads bowed as if in prayer. I blinked, and they were gone. I was alone again. Or maybe I wasn't. Because when I climbed back into the van and turned the key, the radio, dead for hours, crackled to life on its own. A voice came through the static, faint but clear. Tap, tap, tap. 3, 2, 1. And then a whisper. Still here. I don't remember how I got out. The next thing I recall is daylight. The van parked at a gas station near Beckley, a highway patrol car beside me. The officer said he'd found me pulled over on the shoulder, engine running, lights on, staring straight ahead. He asked if I was okay. I told him I'd gotten lost. He said, "You're not the first." I looked down at my hands. They were covered in black dust, coal dust. I've driven across half the country since that night, trying to make sense of what happened. Sometimes I still hear that rhythm in my head, faint but steady, especially when I camp alone. Sometimes I wake up to the sound of tapping against the side of the van, only to find nothing there. But what stays with me most isn't the fear. It's the feeling that something or someone was trying to be heard. Maybe those miners weren't haunting the place out of vengeance. Maybe they were just waiting for someone to remember them. To know that what happened to them wasn't just a story buried under ash and time. Out there, in the forgotten corners of America, there are towns that never stopped burning. Places that remind you what happens when people vanish, but their pain doesn't. If you ever find yourself driving through those hills, past the second bridge, and the world starts to go quiet, listen closely. If you hear that tapping, don't answer. Just drive. Because some stories were never meant to be unearthed, and some roads were never meant to be driven twice. Don't RV camp in Glacier National Park, unless you know this. I learned that lesson the hard way, standing in the freezing dark with nothing but the thin metal shell of my Volkswagen between me and whatever was breathing out there. My name's Elias, and I'm 32 years old. I've camped across the United States long enough to think I understood how the wild works. That arrogance was my first mistake. Thinking nature is just trees and air and silence, believing it's passive, that it exists only to be admired, yeah, that'll get you hurt. Maybe worse. I drove into Glacier at the end of September, a shoulder season when the crowds thin out and the wind turns sharp enough to wake you at night. My Volkswagen camper, my beat-up little sanctuary, rattled along going to the Sun Road like it wasn't sure it would survive the climb. I liked that challenge. I liked feeling alone. I told myself solitude was empowering, that if anything felt wrong, I'd handle it, because I always do, because I'm experienced. But looking back, I've realized something. The more experienced you think you are, the easier it becomes to ignore the warnings. That day, the sky was that impossibly crisp blue, the kind that makes every mountain look like a postcard. Snow dusted like powdered sugar, and the smell of cold creek water cut through the pine. I parked at a campsite tucked near the tree line, just a few yards from where the forest began its slow, suffocating ascent into darkness. It was beautiful in a way that threatened you, like a grin with too many teeth. There were signs everywhere. Be bear aware, food storage required, reports strange wildlife behavior. I remember smirking. Strange wildlife behavior? What does that look like? A deer acting shady? The ranger who checked me in, older guy, sun-beaten wrinkles, voice like he chewed gravel daily, watched me a moment too long before handing back my ID. His stare lingered on my van like he was trying to decide whether I'd make it through the night. "You're camping alone?" he finally asked. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound confident. "You hear anything out there," he said, "anything at all, do not go into the trees. You stay put. You wait for daylight." He said it like a rehearsed line, like he'd said the same thing to someone else before, someone who maybe didn't listen. I gave him a thumbs up, trying to keep it light. "Got it, Ranger. No midnight hikes." He didn't smile, not even a twitch. That should have been my sign. But I told myself he was just trying to scare tourists into being cautious. I told myself a lot of things, like we all do, because the truth was too uncomfortable. By late afternoon, I was drinking coffee at the edge of my van's fold-out table, writing notes about filming locations. The air smelled of distant campfires and cold rock. The wind brushed over the tops of the trees in slow, flat waves. Somewhere far away, thunder cracked. Storm coming faster than expected. That's when I saw it. A figure between the pines. Too still. Too tall. Not an animal. Not quite a person either. More like a silhouette. Long arms, a slouching posture, head tilted as if studying me. I blinked, and it slipped away behind a trunk like smoke. My stomach did a slow roll, but I stood up pretending everything was fine. I even joked to myself, probably just a hiker taking the scenic route, right? The brain loves to lie on your behalf. As night settled in, the wind died unnaturally fast. No crickets, no rustling, No distant snapping of branches, just stillness. The kind that feels staged, manufactured. Like the entire forest had paused to hear what would happen next. I triple-checked my food storage rules, locking everything either in the bear box or sealed tight. Not because I was afraid, at least that's what I told myself, but because it gave me something to do. Something normal. Something that didn't require me to think about tall shadows. Inside the Volkswagen, I pushed the curtains closed, climbed into the sleeping platform, and tried to force familiarity. The same routine I'd done hundreds of nights. Sleep in the wild, trust the wild, respect it. But the wild wasn't respecting me back. Around midnight, a soft thump landed on the roof of my van. My heart clenched. Raccoon, I thought first. Has to be. Then another thump, slightly heavier, then 3 more, like footsteps. Slow, in a pattern too measured for any animal I wanted to accept. I laid there stiff as bone, listening, breath small and silent. My hand hovered near my flashlight but didn't touch it. A part of me believed turning it on would make things real. The footsteps moved toward the front. A dragging sound followed, like fingertips gliding along metal. The VW wasn't built to armor you. Its thin panels and cheap insulation. Whoever, whatever, was outside could hear my breathing if it wanted to. I remembered the ranger's warning. Don't leave the van. Don't go into the trees. Stay put. So I did. I stayed. I waited. The scratching stopped, and in the silence that followed, I made the mistake of hoping it was over. Then a whisper. Not words. Breath. Right beside the driver's door. A long, slow exhale like someone testing how close they could get. Goosebumps prickled every inch of my skin. I stared at the dim outline of the ceiling, and for a moment, I actually felt the darkness pressing down on me, like it was aware, like it was smiling. Another breath. Hotter. Closer. Finally, knuckles tapping on the glass. Not claws, not paws. Knuckles. I swallowed air that felt like knives. My voice shriveled in my throat. My muscles screamed to move, but fear rooted me in place. Tears stung my eyes. Not from sadness, but from the sheer body-locking panic of knowing someone was inches away, yet invisible behind the curtain. Don't look, my brain pleaded. Don't look. Don't give it your attention. But curiosity isn't curiosity when fear commands it. It's a survival instinct misfiring. I inched toward the front curtain. Inches felt like miles in slow motion. My hand shook so violently I thought the van itself might vibrate. I lifted one corner of the fabric, just a sliver, just enough to see a pale face, right there, pressed to the glass, eyes wide, unblinking, yeast-white skin stretched thin, no hair, no eyebrows, just a mouth hanging slack like it forgot how to close. Those eyes, Jesus, they didn't look curious. They looked hungry for comprehension, like it was studying me the same way a scientist studies something they might dissect. I jerked back so hard I slammed into the rear cabinets. Something like a soft gasp came from outside, as if my panic amused it. Then, it smiled. Not a normal smile, the kind that pulls the corners of the mouth. This stretched upward from the center, like skin being dragged by invisible hooks. I slapped the curtain shut. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. My mind was screaming, call someone. But service bars were dead. The ranger station miles away, and even if I could run through that forest, into that darkness, no. I had no plan, no backup, just denial melting into terror. Then the voice came, broken, raspy, like vocal cords learn speech by imitation, not by nature. You're not supposed to be here. My body turned ice. I had to do something, anything, because if I stayed frozen long enough, maybe it would invite itself inside. And that's when the door handle twitched. The door handle clicked once. A tiny metallic shift that echoed like a gunshot inside the cramped Volkswagen. My heart became a pounding animal, thrashing against my ribs, wanting out. The whispering wind outside had died completely, leaving only the low hum of blood in my ears. I stared at that handle, willing it not to move again. It did. Slow, calculated, like someone trying to figure out the mechanics of getting inside. I scrambled forward in the dark, grabbing the manual lock and forcing it down with all the strength panic could give me. The handle jerked again, harder this time, followed by a faint sound, like someone breathing a frustrated laugh. At that point, instinct screamed. turn on the lights. But another deeper, older instinct, one that lived in bones long before electricity, told me the opposite. Told me that light would not protect me. It would only reveal me, illuminate me, make me prey in a box with windows. So I stayed in darkness. I pressed my shoulder against the door, as if my 160 pounds could somehow reinforce the flimsy frame, as if fear alone could fortify metal. The voice came again, this time smoother, like it was learning. Open. Please. It didn't sound threatening. It sounded curious, polite, wrong. Politeness from something that should not have a mouth, should not be speaking at all, was profoundly wrong. No, I finally whispered, barely audible even to myself. Silence. Hard silence. Then a single tap on the window, almost affectionate before the pressure lifted. The handle went still. The breath disappeared. And yet, I didn't trust the quiet. Quiet is a mask. Minutes dragged. My body stayed locked, tense, every muscle aware that moving could be a mistake. Eventually, the numbness in my legs forced me to shift. I slid back onto the bed platform and sat there, knees hugged tight. I thought about my arrival, about how confident I had been, how cavalier. I replayed every thoughtless assumption. I told myself the ranger's warning was just protocol. I said a lot of things, even now, trying to restore a reality I could trust. Wrong. It was all wrong. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes. Time had become a liar. The darkness outside remained absolute. I clung to the hope that if I just outlasted the night, daylight would cut through whatever nightmare was hovering around my van. Finally, fatigue dragged me under. A half-sleep of jagged dreams and constant flinches. I woke up to morning light, forcing its way through the curtains. For a fleeting second, relief washed over me. Then I saw the footprints, dozens of them, surrounding the van in a perfect circle. Bare human footprints, longer than mine. Oddly narrow, toes elongated like each one had been pulled too far from the foot. The prints led straight to each door, each window, like it had walked every inch of the van, studying the structure, measuring its weakness. The dirt was dry. It hadn't rained, meaning those prints were fresh, meaning I wasn't dreaming. A full-body shiver tore through me. I stepped out to inspect the ground more closely. The circle of prints went deeper into the tree line, and then vanished completely. Not faded, vanished, as if whoever or whatever made them stop touching the earth. Fear should have been enough to make me leave. But fear is rational when it becomes real. And when fear becomes rational, some part of your mind desperately tries to take control back, to explain, to deny. Maybe I was sleepwalking, I told myself. Maybe someone was messing with me. No one walks barefoot in freezing mountain soil. I shoved that truth aside and focused on the comfortable lie that daylight meant safety. I made coffee with shaky hands. The warmth helped me pretend I was fine. The ranger would be on his morning patrol soon, I thought. I'd tell him. He'd have an explanation. Only, when I went to find him, the ranger station was silent, locked, no truck, no gear. It looked abandoned. That made no sense. His shift had just begun yesterday. He shouldn't have gone anywhere. I stood outside the station door for far too long, staring at my reflection in the dusty window. I didn't recognize the terror in my own posture. My mind drifted back to the face I saw, that stretched, unnatural smile. And the words, "You're not supposed to be here." The thought hit me like a fist. Maybe the warning hadn't been about bears. I returned to my van and considered leaving. The keys were in my pocket. The road was right there. The mountains, breathtaking as ever, told me escape was easy. Just drive. But that's where denial sunk its teeth in again. Because I planned to film this trip. I needed the footage, needed the story, needed to prove to myself, more than anyone, that I wasn't afraid, that I could figure out what was happening. So I told myself a brand new lie. Nothing was going to happen again. The night was over. That thing wouldn't come back. And if it did, I'd be ready. I spent the afternoon exploring the riverbank, gathering footage of light bouncing off the water like broken mirrors. But my attention kept snapping back to the trees. I felt watched. Every time I panned the camera, I expected to see that silhouette again, lurking, waiting. As evening crept across the valley, a storm began brewing overhead. Thick gray clouds smothered the peaks and turned the air electric. A low rumble of thunder crawled through the sky. I stood there, staring at the oncoming darkness, and finally listening to my instincts. I packed. Fast, tossed gear into drawers, slammed cabinets, locked the bear box. My plan was simple. Make it back to the exit before nightfall. Put Glacier behind me. Pretend none of this ever happened. But fear doesn't let go cleanly. As I jumped into the driver's seat, the Volkswagen sputtered and coughed like it had been poisoned. I turned the key again and again. Nothing but a choking grind of metal. Come on! Come on! My palms slipped against the wheel. My breath quickened. The storm wind howled suddenly, slamming against the van so hard I thought the windows might crack. Finally, the engine caught, a defiant roar. I threw the van into drive. The moment my headlights swept the tree line, it stepped out, not emerging, not wandering, stepping, purposeful, tall, thin, arms too long for its body, that mouth hanging open like it was mid-scream but making no sound. The same pale face that had stared at me through glass, now illuminated in full by my headlights. The breath left my chest in one brutal exhale. I floored the gas. The tires spun in the damp dirt. The Volkswagen lurched forward, then skidded sideways as if something heavy had struck the rear bumper. I looked in the mirror. It was running, on all fours now. Too fast, faster than anything that shape should move. I slammed the wheel, fishtailing onto the main camp road. The van stabilized, wheels finally gripping. I pushed it to its limit, 30, 40, 50, the speedometer trembling. I glanced again. It was gone. Relief flickered. Maybe I outran it. Maybe. Bang! The van jolted. Something hit the roof. Something heavy. Clinging. I screamed, a raw involuntary sound, my vision warping at the edges as adrenaline overload turned the world into static. The roof dented inward. I heard metal screaming under weight. I swerved, trying to shake it loose, but it held tight. Lightning split the sky, a flash of violent white. And in that instant, I saw its face pressed against the windshield from the outside, upside down, smile stretching too wide, those bottomless eyes staring directly into mine. My grip failed. The van veered. And I remember thinking, not about survival, not about escape, but about that ranger's voice. You hear anything out there. Do not go into the trees. But the Volkswagen disagreed. It slid sideways, skidded off the road, down a shallow embankment, straight into the forest. Darkness swallowed me whole as the storm unleashed its fury above. The impact wasn't deadly, just violent enough to rattle every nerve and shake loose the illusion that I was still in control. Branches slapped the windshield like angry hands. The wheels spun uselessly in mud as the engine whined, stuck deep. I killed the ignition out of panic more than logic, and for a moment, the only sound was my own ragged breathing. Then, the roof creaked. Something shifted its weight above me. If fear had a temperature, mine was absolute zero. Every muscle locked again, trapped between fight and freeze was winning. I slid down in the seat, making myself small, uselessly hoping thin glass and tin metal could conceal me. A slow drag of fingers crawled toward the edge of the roof. I listened, begging for thunder to drown out the sound, but the storm held its breath. Even the rain paused, suspended midair in dreadful anticipation. I studied the rearview mirror, the side windows, the blur of black trees. Nothing. Then a thud against the passenger side made me flinch so hard my teeth snapped together. A handprint smeared across the fog glass. 5 elongated fingers, skin so pale it almost glowed. Those fingers tapped gently, rhythmically, like knocking on a coffin lid to see if someone was awake. Tap, tap. I squeezed my eyes shut because seeing it again might break something in me that wouldn't heal. But the knocking continued, louder, more insistent. Open. Please, the voice wasn't outside anymore. It was behind me. I whipped around so fast I slammed my elbow against the console. The van was empty. No doors had opened. No windows had been touched. But the voice, deepened now, shaped more like language, had come from inside the walls of the van itself. No, not inside, below. The floor vibrated. Something was crawling beneath the Volkswagen. Metal groaned as a fist or a head pressed upward from under the chassis. The floor bulged inward as if the ground itself wanted to reach my feet. I stumbled backwards into the back of the camper, searching for what? A weapon? A miracle? I found a metal flashlight and clutched it like it could kill what nightmares fear. The van rocked, lifted slightly. It was trying to flip the vehicle. No, 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 I gasped, choking on disbelief. I dove toward the driver's seat. If I could start the engine, if I could just get traction, I could. Another violent shove rolled the van onto its side. I screamed, body slamming against the cabinets. Items exploded from their compartments. Pans clanged, gear scattered, cupboards burst open. I tumbled hard, landing on the window now below me. The forest stared back through broken branches. My breath fogged the glass. Then a face pressed against that same pain, the same wrong smile. The same hunger. I kicked at the opposite wall, scrambling upward, trying to gain height in a van that was now 90 degrees wrong. My shoulders slammed into the sliding side door. My fingers found the handle. I didn't think about the ranger's warning. I didn't think about the footprints. I thought only about escape. I yanked the door. Cold rain and pine air blasted into the van. I hurled myself into the night. I landed on my ankle wrong. Pain shot up my leg. I stumbled, limping through the soaking brush, eyes fixed on the thin slice of road above. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the twisted trees and slick rocks. Everything glistened like fangs in a cavernous mouth. Behind me, the Volkswagen screeched, metal scraping against bark as something climbed out of it. I didn't look. Looking would slow me down. The forest floor turned treacherous, roots clawing at my boots. Needles and branches tore at my skin. The rain soaked through my jacket immediately, chilling bone. I pushed forward, heart detonating inside my chest, lungs clawing for air. A sound followed, a wet rhythmic thud, like bare feet slapping mud. Fast, too fast. Please, the voice called. Not a request. A lure. I tripped, rolled, mud filled my mouth. I scrambled to my knees, coughing, flashlight gone, breath gone, courage nearly gone. But instincts, those were screaming, up, move, now. I surged upright and spotted the faint reflective stripe of the road's guardrail. I clawed my way toward it, fingers slipping against the slick slope. Lightning strobed again, painting shadows across the hillside. The creature was halfway up behind me. A silhouette with too many joints bending in the wrong directions. I threw myself at the guardrail, grabbing hold with both hands. My muscles burned with terror and exertion, and I hauled myself up onto the cracked asphalt. For a moment, the safety of the road tricked me into believing I was free. Then I heard a second set of footsteps. Not behind. Ahead. A man in a ranger uniform emerged from the darkness, drenched and unmoving. His hat shadowed his face, his stance rigid. Relief surged, until I registered how wrong the scene felt. He wasn't carrying a radio, or a flashlight, or any gear, and his boots were clean. Too clean. He tilted his head at me, just like the silhouette had the previous evening. Same angle, same uncanny slowness. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. The voice wasn't gravelly anymore. It wasn't human. The creature from the slope hissed behind me, climbing onto the road. I was trapped between two impossibilities. My mind spun, refusing to accept any of this, clinging to denial like a life raft in a hurricane. Then, like a blessing, car headlights appeared far down the curve, two bright orbs cutting through storm and shadow. A vehicle, a chance, freedom. I screamed, full-throated, desperate, waving my arms. "Hey, help!" The ranger thing snapped its head toward the approaching light and let out a guttural snarl that shook my spine. The other creature scuttled forward on all fours, teeth clicking like bone wind chimes. I ran toward the oncoming vehicle, limping through agony, screaming with everything inside me. The headlights grew. Closer, closer. The ranger thing lunged, but the car reached us first. Brake lights flared red, tires screeching just feet from impact. The creatures recoiled, retreating with unnatural speed into the trees as though the light itself burned them. The vehicle door flew open. A woman's voice, sharp with fear. "Oh my God, are you okay?" She reached for me, guiding me into the passenger seat. My body shook uncontrollably, words collapsing in my mouth when I tried to speak. She kept asking questions, but I couldn't process any of them. The only thing I could do was look out the window into the wall of black trunks, certain those eyes were still there, watching. As we sped back toward civilization, Glacier finally exhaled, the storm breaking behind us. But inside me, the storm was only beginning. Because I realized something I didn't dare say out loud. Those things weren't territorial. They were waiting. The woman driving didn't slow down until we hit the main road leading out of the park. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles glowed white. I tried to steady my breathing, but terror clung to me like wet canvas. My chest kept hitching, like if I exhaled too much, something cold might fill the empty space. "What happened back there?" she asked finally. "You look like you saw a—" She cut herself off before she could finish the word. I didn't blame her. Saying ghost or monster made it all feel absurd, but nothing about what I saw belonged to stories. "I just need to leave Glacier," I whispered. She nodded, and for a while, the hum of tires on asphalt became the lullaby I needed. But something was wrong. The farther we drove, the heavier the air became. My ears popped like the pressure around us was building, not releasing. I glanced at the GPS displayed on her dash. No signal, no route showing, just the little blue dot spinning in place. "Is there another exit?" she muttered, frustration creeping into her voice. "Why does this road feel wrong?" The headlights stretched across the asphalt like it was melting into the night. The trees thickened, branches bending toward us, reaching like arms hoping to drag the car back where we came from. A chill crawled up my neck. "We should have reached the junction by now," I said. "We didn't pass any turns. We've been driving straight." She glanced over at me. Her eyes reflected the dashboard light. Wide, worried. "I think we should." Her sentence died under a thunderous bang. The car lurched. The front end dipped. Sparks shot from the road as she fought the wheel to regain control. We skidded sideways, tires screaming, before slamming to a stop inches from a boulder that hadn't been there moments ago. Her breathing was fast, broken. "Flat tire," she gasped. But I knew better. They'd found us again. We both looked out the windshield. There, right in the center of the road, stood the same creature from before. Its neck crooked at an impossible angle, its smile stretching like torn elastic. Rainwater slid off its skin like it wasn't skin at all. "Lock the doors," I breathed. She did. The creature took a step toward us, slow, toying. Then another step. Faster. My hand found the glove compartment and ripped it open. Nothing but papers. Useless. The woman slammed her palm against the horn. The blast echoed across the trees like a distress signal no one would answer. The creature didn't react. Its eyes, black wells, studied me, identifying me, claiming me. "You shouldn't have left the van," it croaked. "You're not supposed to leave." My entire body seized with cold realization. It wasn't protecting territory. It wasn't confused. It had rules. Rules I had broken. The woman fumbled for her phone, dead screen. She cursed under her breath, panic rising. "What do we do?" I stared ahead, trembling. Light. We saw it, hated the headlights. Maybe, if we blast it, keep it back. Before she could respond, something slammed onto the roof of the car. Claws or hands scraped across metal. A second creature, then a third. Their weight shook the chassis violently. The woman screamed. "Drive!" I yelled. "Even if the tire's dead. Just go!" She slammed the accelerator. The car jolted forward on ruined rubber, grinding sparks as it fought its way down the road. The creature in front leapt onto the hood, its face inches from the glass. That smile wider, cracking skin as it stretched. Headlights washed over it, and steam rose from its flesh like boiling water. It recoiled, shrieking, sliding off the side. But the others clung to the roof like nightmares with purpose. The car pulled, a dragging weight. Faster, faster, until something gave. Screeching metal, the roof denting inward, their hands punching through like butter. "Get down!" I shouted, grabbing her jacket and pulling her beneath the dashboard. Glass exploded inward as a pale arm reached for us, fingers twitching inches from my face. I kicked at it, again, the flashlight bruising bone as I swung wildly. Then another flash. Not lightning. Fire. Headlights from another vehicle tore around the bend, blindingly bright. The creatures recoiled, screeching, dropping from the roof. They scattered into the dark, bodies folding unnaturally as they fled. A rugged RV screeched to a stop alongside us. 3 men jumped out, armed with huge spotlights and flare guns. The lead man looked at me like he already knew. "You're the guy in the Volkswagen," he said. I nodded, trembling so violently I thought I might shatter. "Good," he muttered. "We've been looking for you." He swung the spotlight into the forest, the beam slicing through tree trunks like a warning. The woods answered with a chorus of hushed hisses. The woman and I were ushered quickly into the RV. It bristled with industrial floodlights mounted around its frame. The men worked with urgency, as if a countdown I couldn't hear was speeding up. As the RV rolled forward, slow but steady, I found my voice enough to ask, "What are those things?" The man closest to me didn't meet my eyes. "People," he said. At least, they were. Cold flooded deeper than fear. "What happened to them?" "They went deeper than anyone else," he answered. "Ignored warnings, wanted the untouched trails, the solitude, the glory. This park changes the ones who go too far, wipes away what's human, leaves something that hates the rest of us for remembering." I felt nauseous. The leader added, voice tight, "And they don't like anyone who doesn't belong. You didn't ask permission. You didn't follow the rules." The RV shook as something slammed the back bumper. Claws scraped wildly against the light shields. The men shouted, firing flares into the dark. Red lights splashed across monstrous silhouettes skittering between trees. One of them turned toward the windows. Its face blistered and peeling under the red glow. Its mouth opened into that same grotesque smile. "You're not supposed to be here," it rasped. The leader hit a switch. Every light on the RV, every spotlight, every high beam ignited at once. A sunburst trapped in metal. The creatures shrieked and vanished, fleeing into shadow they could still claim. The men didn't let up until the gates of the park appeared in the distance, until the wild surrendered to man-made signs and asphalt certainty. When we finally passed the boundary, an invisible weight lifted from my lungs. The RV rolled to a stop beneath a street lamp, the kind so ordinary it felt like salvation. "You get 1 second chance," the leader said quietly, his eyes holding mine like an oath. "Don't come back here after dark, not ever." The woman cried softly, relief and terror blending. I couldn't find tears. My body was too busy holding me together. They escorted us to safety, real safety. Phones buzzing back to life, warm lights, people, civilization. As dawn broke, Glacier's peaks glowed gold in the distance, beautiful, majestic, deceitful. I stood there shaking, watching the horizon reveal a place I thought I knew. I had always told myself the wilderness was pure, healing, honest. But there's a darker honesty there too. Nature doesn't care about you, and some places don't just want you gone, they want you changed. Now every campsite I pick, I listen first, to the air, the silence, the way the wild watches. And I remember that night in Glacier, how close I came, how loud my instincts screamed, how I denied them until denial nearly killed me. So take this from someone who learned by surviving. Don't RV camp in Glacier National Park unless you know exactly where you belong. And if the trees ever fall silent, if the night stops breathing, if a voice whispers from the dark asking to come inside, do not open the door, because some of the people who go missing out there never left. They're still waiting, smiling, hoping you'll ignore the rules, just like I did. I'll write the coordinates nowhere found as a continuous, emotionally rich first-person Volkswagen camping horror story set in the arid silence of the American Southwest, somewhere between the vast emptiness of Arizona and New Mexico, where signal fades, road signs vanish, and even sound seems to dry in the air. It will unfold in 3 connected parts, 1,300 words each, designed for seamless YouTube voiceover. Realistic, immersive, and deeply unsettling with emotional depth and reflection. Here's part 1. The coordinates nowhere found. I remember the first time I saw that stretch of road on the map, a thin gray line cutting through nothing. No towns, no parks, not even a service station, just an unmarked trail on my old Volkswagen's GPS screen, labeled only by a set of coordinates. I'd been chasing quiet places lately. somewhere the noise couldn't follow me, somewhere I could sleep without the static of other people's lives pressing against the thin walls of my van. I'd been living out of that Volkswagen for almost a year, traveling from one campground to another. I worked remote gigs, sent my deliverables over borrowed Wi-Fi, and kept the rest of my life in boxes under the bed platform. It wasn't glamorous. The photos online make it look cleaner, freer, but it was real. Every sound at night had weight. Every morning carried a hint of risk. When I punched in those coordinates, I thought it would be like the rest, some hidden Bureau of Land Management spot, maybe a forgotten desert pullout where old campers used to park. But the map didn't even recognize it as public land. That should have been my first warning. I drove out from Holbrook late in the afternoon. The highway thinned, then the road itself dissolved into pale dirt. I remember how the air shimmered in the heat, that metallic scent of dust and oil seeping in through the vents. My van rattled over the washboard ridges, and every few miles I'd see the ghost of a road sign, sun-bleached blank. I thought I saw movement once, something darting between the cactus shadows, but when I slowed down, there was nothing but silence. Even the wind felt distant. By sunset, I'd reached what I thought was the end of the road, a narrow rise overlooking a dry wash, framed by red rock and twisted brush. The coordinates blinked on my GPS like a heartbeat. I parked the van there, stepped out, and let the desert hum around me. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. I made camp the way I always did. Unroll the awning, fold out the small solar lamp, and cook something simple. I watched the horizon fade from gold to bruised violet. I told myself the stillness was what I'd come for, to feel small again, to remember that silence could be beautiful. But as the light drained from the rocks, the desert changed. It wasn't just that it got dark, it emptied. The air lost its warmth too quickly. My breath hung in front of me, though it was early autumn. The sand started to harden under my boots like cooling metal. I heard small clicks, not crickets, not rodents, just dry mechanical snaps echoing across the wash. I turned off the lantern and stood there in the dark, listening. It was then that I noticed the faint smell. Not rot, not sulfur. Something else, faint chemical, almost sweet, like the air after lightning. I thought maybe something had leaked from the van, but when I checked, everything was sealed. The GPS light still blinked inside. But when I leaned through the open door, the coordinates had changed. Just a few digits. Barely noticeable. But they weren't the same as before. I remember staring at them for a long time, waiting for them to switch back. They didn't. So I took a screenshot, just a habit, and tried to ignore the feeling crawling up my back. Maybe the satellite connection was drifting. Maybe I was tired. But when I looked outside again, I realized the desert looked different. It's hard to describe, like the light itself had flattened. The stars felt closer, but the horizon had vanished. I couldn't see where the sky ended or where the rock began. Everything was one dim shape, breathing slowly. Then I heard it, a soft rhythmic sound, far off like footsteps on sand. I told myself it was the wind. I sat in the van, closed the door, locked it out of instinct. I left the engine off, lights off, just listened. The sound came and went. 2 steps, pause, 2 more, closer each time. Every rational part of me screamed that I was imagining it. But there's a difference between fear and instinct. Fear makes you overreact. Instinct makes you still. I stayed like that until my legs started to cramp. At some point, exhaustion took over. I must have dozed off against the steering wheel. When I woke up, it was just before dawn. Pale light soaked the sky, and everything outside looked almost normal again. No prints near the van, no strange marks. But when I checked the GPS, the coordinates had changed again. Now it was pointing somewhere a few miles further south. And the strangest part, it had saved the new coordinates automatically, like it was giving me a route. I don't know what possessed me, but I followed them. Maybe curiosity, maybe arrogance. I wanted to prove to myself that fear had no hold over me anymore, that I could face the strange and make it make sense. The dirt road narrowed, then vanished. I had to drive over rock and brush. the Volkswagen shuddering with every bump. It was mid-morning when I saw something glinting in the distance, a shimmer of metal half buried in the sand. I parked and walked out. The heat hit me like a wall. At first I thought it was an old trailer, but as I got closer, I saw the curved roof, the faded logo. It was a Volkswagen, same model, same year, lying on its side, half covered in dust, and the license plate was from my state. I froze there, the sun burning into my neck, the sand biting at my shoes. The Volkswagen was tilted at an angle, its windshield shattered, its paint dulled by years of grit and wind. The doors were sealed with a crust of dirt, and the tires had rotted into blackened rings. But it was unmistakably the same model as mine. Same faded teal, same rear decal from a camping store in Oregon. I stepped closer and brushed my hand along the side. The metal was blistering hot. My reflection flickered faintly across the curved surface, warped and dull. Something was wrong with the air. It shimmered like heat mirage, but the motion didn't match the temperature. The air rippled in one direction, pulling ever so slightly toward the van's broken window. It was as if the world was breathing through it. Inside, it was dark. I crouched, peered through the shattered glass, and for a split second, I saw the shape of someone sitting in the driver's seat, a faint outline, perfectly still. But when I blinked, it was gone. My throat felt dry, like swallowing dust. I told myself it was just the play of shadow and reflection, that this was an abandoned wreck, maybe a tourist's car from decades ago. But then I saw it, the coordinates scratched into the metal near the rear hatch, carved deep with something sharp. The numbers were the same as the ones glowing on my GPS that morning, the same sequence that had changed itself. I backed away fast, my boots slipping in the sand. The air behind me pulsed just once, a soft, hollow pop like air being sucked through a straw. I turned, expecting wind, but the desert was still. Only silence, broken by my heartbeat. I wanted to leave then, but the Volkswagen in front of me, that ruin of metal and memory, felt like a mirror I couldn't look away from. I walked around to the driver's side, and that's when I noticed something else. A faded sticker on the rear bumper, peeling but legible enough to read 3 words. Find your silence. It was the same phrase I had stenciled onto mine 2 years ago after I left the city. Every part of me went cold. I stumbled back toward my own van, threw open the door, and slammed it shut behind me. I started the engine, the fan belt shrieking against the dry air. I didn't even check the route. I just floored it, like bouncing over the uneven sand until I hit a path that looked like road. The dust swallowed everything behind me. When I finally stopped, it was only because the GPS beeped again. I looked down. New coordinates. Different, but close. Almost like it was trying to correct me. That's when I lost cell signal. Every bar disappeared at once. The desert out there looked endless. Same rock formations, same flat horizon. For the first time in my life, I couldn't tell which way I'd come from. I sat there, gripping the wheel, staring at those new numbers blinking softly like they were waiting for me to answer. I didn't move. I don't know how long I stayed that way. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. The sun sank lower, and my van's shadow stretched across the sand like an arm reaching for something it would never touch. Eventually, I gave in. I told myself I'd follow the coordinates just a little farther. Get high ground. Maybe signal would return. So I drove again, slower this time. The road was gone completely, replaced by narrow gullies that scraped the van's underside. My mirrors caught flashes of movement, tiny bursts of dust that looked like figures crouching and vanishing. I didn't dare stop. The coordinates led me toward a ridge. As I climbed, I saw something that made my skin tighten. Scattered across the plateau were more vehicles, all old, all faded. Some half-buried, others stripped to frames. A few were Volkswagens, others pickup campers, rusted trailers, like a graveyard of travelers who'd all come looking for the same kind of silence. I parked at the edge, too afraid to go closer. The air was trembling again, not from heat, but from a low, steady vibration beneath my feet. Like something far below was moving, deep under the desert crust. I felt it through the floor of my van, a faint thrum that rose and fell, rhythmic, almost alive. Then I heard the knocking, soft, distant at first, coming from somewhere outside. I turned off the engine and listened. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow taps. It wasn't random. It sounded like someone was testing the walls of the van. I checked every window, every shadow. Nothing moved out there, but the sound kept going, not from one direction, but from different sides, like it was circling me. I shouted out then, something stupid like, "Who's there?" My voice cracked in the dryness. Silence answered. Then, after a pause, one single knock from inside the storage compartment near my bed, I stared at the latch. It was shut. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My whole body was shaking, caught between the urge to open it and the urge to flee. Finally, I reached out, flipped the latch, and pulled it open. Nothing, just empty storage bins, a few cables, and my old camping stove. But when I turned back to the GPS, the numbers had changed again. Now they were identical to the ones carved into the wrecked Volkswagen, and the screen flickered once, not glitching, but like it was reflecting light from something directly behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't, because I saw it in the corner of my eye, the faint shape of a figure standing outside the window, face pale in the fading sun, watching me through the glass. I don't know how long I stared without breathing. The figure outside didn't move, just stood there, outlined by the red wash of the dying sun. I could barely make out the shape of its shoulders, the tilt of its head. It wasn't close enough for me to see a face, but it was too defined to be a trick of the light. I blinked once, and it was gone. Not stepped away. Gone. Like the horizon had swallowed it whole. My hands trembled against the wheel. I started the engine again, the familiar cough of the Volkswagen grounding me for a second. I told myself I was leaving. No more following coordinates, no more curiosity. I'd get back to pavement, find a diner, call someone. But when I shifted into gear, the GPS lit up with a faint, insistent tone, soft, like a heartbeat. The coordinates changed again. Only this time they pointed backward, the exact spot I'd come from. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt the salt sting my lips. It wasn't sadness. It was frustration, disbelief. How do you argue with a machine when it's acting like it knows where you should go? Still, I drove forward. I didn't care about direction anymore. I just needed motion. The desert swallowed everything that looked familiar. The shapes of the rocks changed as I passed, though I knew they shouldn't. The sun fell, the light bled away, and I turned on the headlights. That's when I saw them, reflections flickering ahead, like cat eyes, dozens of them, hovering at different heights. For a second, I thought it was animals. Coyotes, maybe. But as I slowed, the reflections didn't blink. They moved in unison, rising, circling, spreading in a half ring around the front of my van. Then I realized they weren't eyes. They were screens. Small, rectangular, each one faintly glowing with coordinates, the same numbers as mine. Every direction I turned, more of them flickered to life, scattered across the desert floor like offerings. Old GPS units, shattered phones, cracked tablets, half buried in dust, all glowing the same sequence. The air grew thick. My headlights dimmed, the battery meter dropped. My Volkswagen's engine hiccuped once and went silent. Then I heard the voice. It wasn't outside. It came through the speakers, quiet, distorted, layered with static. Find your silence. The same words from the sticker. I lunged for the key, twisting, slamming the ignition, but nothing. The lights flickered weakly, then died completely. The desert fell into darkness. I sat there in the black, my breath shallow, sweat cold against my neck. I could hear faint footsteps outside again, crunching the sand, slow, deliberate. I reached for my flashlight, but before I could turn it on, something hit the side of the van. Not a knock this time, a single hollow strike that echoed through the frame. I froze. Another hit came, then another in rhythm. It wasn't random anymore. It was 3 knocks again. Pause. 3 knocks again, like a signal. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, but there was nothing, just the empty desert stretching endlessly. Then in the distance, I saw movement. Dozens of figures walking, slow and aimless, silhouettes against the faint glow of all those scattered screens. None of them moved naturally. Some limped, some staggered in strange half circles, some crawled. I slammed my fist against the horn. Nothing. The battery was gone. Every instinct told me to run. But when I opened the door, I realized the ground wasn't flat anymore. The sand had shifted. A wide depression had formed around my van, shallow but spreading, as though something beneath had begun to sink or breathe. The air grew colder with each second. The smell returned, that faint chemical sweetness, stronger now. And beneath it, another smell. Ozone. Like lightning, my skin prickled. The static in the air was so thick it felt alive. Then, without warning, all the GPS units in the desert blinked off at once. Total blackness. And in that silence, something whispered my name. Not from outside, from behind me. I turned slowly, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam caught the rearview mirror first, and in its reflection, I saw a man sitting in the back seat. He looked like me. Same jacket, same hair, same faint scar on the cheek from a hiking fall years ago. He was just staring, motionless, eyes dark and empty. I couldn't move. The flashlight slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor, its beam rolling over the dashboard. The GPS screen blinked back to life one final time. Only now, the coordinates weren't numbers anymore. They were words. Nowhere found. I must have blacked out because when I opened my eyes again, it was daylight. The van was still. The air was still. Everything looked unchanged, except for one thing. My Volkswagen was parked in a different place. The ridge was gone, the wrecks were gone, even the gullies had vanished. I was in an open, flat stretch of desert I didn't recognize, with fresh tire tracks leading up to where I sat, my own tire tracks, looping in circles around me. No signal, no sound. The GPS was dead, its screen cracked straight through the middle. For the first time, I felt something like acceptance. Maybe this was what I'd been chasing all along. Silence so complete it erased everything, even direction. I got out and walked a few steps from the van. The ground was cool beneath my boots, the sky perfectly still, no wind, no trace of night. But in the distance, something shimmered, a faint teal curve, half buried in sand. Another Volkswagen. I didn't go closer. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and looked at my own reflection in the van window. The same warped glass, the same faint outline. For a moment, I thought I saw movement behind my shoulder again, but this time I didn't turn, because maybe that's how it works out here. Maybe some roads were never meant to end. They just fold over themselves, coordinates looping like old tape. And maybe somewhere beneath this silence, there's a version of me still driving, still trying to find a signal that will never come. Maybe that's the price of chasing quiet. Eventually, you find it, and it finds you back. I've learned that the forest doesn't need to roar to terrify you. Sometimes, silence is the loudest warning you'll ever hear. My name is Aaron Cole. I'm 42 years old, born and raised under the wide Colorado sky, but I've spent the last decade chasing the wild mystery of the Pacific Northwest in my battered silver RV. I never meant to become the kind of person who investigates missing hikers or who can't sleep unless he's parked beneath tall, old-growth giants that blot out the constellations. But life pushes you into roles you didn't apply for. And once I heard the first story about a young woman who vanished without a trace inside Mount Hood National Forest, I thought it was just a local tragedy. Until the second story came, and the third, and the 10th. And then I stopped believing in coincidence. I came out here alone, deep into Oregon's national forests, hoping to understand why so many stories about hikers end without answers. People always assume that getting lost is just one wrong turn on a well-maintained trail. But out here, the woods decide whether you get found. And this time, those woods were testing me. I remember the first night vividly. The air smelled sharp, pine sap and cold moss. My RV was parked beside an abandoned trailhead. The wooden signs scorched by time and weather, the carved letters barely readable. The ranger I met earlier warned me that the trail was closed after dusk. His eyes lingered too long on the map taped to the inside of my window. Then he asked quietly if anyone knew where I was going. It should have been a red flag. Instead, I laughed it off, pretending his look didn't make my stomach twist. Fear felt like weakness, and I was here to prove something. To myself, maybe. To the world. To the missing. By nightfall, fog had already crept low and heavy between the trees. My only illumination came from the faint, flickering glow of the RV's overhead light and the fire I'd built to keep the cold at bay. I sat there eating rehydrated chili, pretending I wasn't listening too hard to what I couldn't see. A branch snapped somewhere to my left, then another. I told myself it was deer, elk, a harmless black bear. But the way the sound paused and resumed felt too deliberate, too careful. I stared deeper into the tree line, squinting. The fire crackled beside me like it wanted attention I couldn't give. Suddenly, a light appeared, far off, but not moving like a headlamp, suspended, hovering. My first assumption was a camper. But the shape of the glow, it was too round, too pale. It pulsed once, twice, and then went out like it had been swallowed whole. The quiet returned, thicker than before. Even the fire seemed to hush itself. I had promised myself I wouldn't go chasing strange things into the woods, yet my boots were already on. There's a rule for RV campers. At night, stay close to your home on wheels. The doors lock, the heater runs. Safety is 4 walls and a roof you can move away at dawn. But that light, God, the forest dared me with it. The missing hikers weren't found by sitting in one place. If I wanted answers, I had to go where they disappeared. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the dirt. The fire hissed behind me, protesting the sudden movement. Cold mist licked the back of my neck like the forest was smelling me, tasting the heat I carried with me. My beam cut through the dark in trembling slices, revealing only trees, towering, ancient, and watching. The trail was narrow, almost intentionally deceptive, like nature had tried to erase it. The deeper I walked, the more the woods pressed inward. Branches brushed my jacket like probing fingers. My breath came out in white clouds, each one drifting toward the dark like it was being pulled. And beneath the crunch of my footsteps, I heard another rhythm, a second pair of steps, following. I stopped. The echo stopped too. When I turned the flashlight around, the beam caught nothing but the empty air where my fear was pointing. I wasn't about to call out, "Who's there?" I've never understood why people in horror movies practically invite the monster to introduce itself. Instead, I turned back forward, kept moving, faster now. The trail dipped, revealing a clearing bathed in a ghostly gray glow. A dead campsite sat at its center, not abandoned, dead. A ragged, mold-soaked tent, its fabric ripped from the inside. A collapsed fire pit bordered by rocks that had been toppled over. Unopened cans of food scattered like someone left in a hurry. And footprints leading away. I swallowed against a tightening throat. I'd seen photos like this before. The young woman from Mount Hood. The 3 hikers who vanished in Ochoco. The pair of brothers never recovered from Clackamas, each seen different. Each one wrong in the same exact way, like the forest learned and adapted. I moved slowly, carefully. The tent flap was stiff with dried mud as I lifted it. Inside, I found a single hiking boot, not a pair, just one. The material shredded near the toe, threads hanging like torn ligaments. I didn't want to imagine whether the damage came before or after the boot was taken off. A gust of wind swept into the clearing and snuffed every sound again. And then I heard it, whispering. Not speech, not wind, whispering. Soft, low voices weaving together in a murmur that seemed to come from every direction at once. I spun in a full circle, flashlight shaking like a frightened pulse. The whispers grew sharper, more urgent, each one threading into the next like a tapestry of warnings. They sounded like words, but not in a language I could root in any earthly place. My ears wanted to make meaning. My brain refused. Then a single voice separated from the rest. Follow. The beam trembled in my hand, skimming tree trunks etched with deep claw marks, 4 parallel lines tearing downward through bark. Fresh. Wet. I stumbled backward, but the forest behind me felt suddenly deeper, darker. The footprints I'd noticed earlier, human footsteps, extended farther than my light could reach. And next to them, another set of prints. Larger. Wider. with a dragging pattern like something didn't lift its feet fully when it moved. Maybe this was the moment I should have turned around. Maybe this was the last crossroads where logic could win. But fear, when it grows the right way, it becomes curiosity in disguise. If someone was alive out here, if someone needed help, I couldn't be the one who ran from them. I kept walking. Step by slow step, the trail became a tunnel of trees. Their branches arched overhead, a twisted cathedral framing the moonless sky. Every sound I made seemed too loud, every breath a betrayal. I tried to swallow the panic crawling up my ribs, but it had already reached my heart. And when I finally saw where the footprints led, my fear became absolute. They stopped, right at the edge of a ravine. The ground broke open into a jagged drop over 50 feet deep, sharp rocks glittering in the weak light. There was no bridge, no path forward. The cliff consumed the trail completely. The human prints ended inches from the edge. But the larger prints, the dragging ones, they continued straight down the vertical rock, disappearing into the abyss like gravity had agreed to look the other way. I felt the forest lean closer. That's when something exhaled behind me. Hot, moist, close. I didn't turn around. My instincts screamed in a primal language older than spoken words. Move. I ran. I don't remember making the decision to sprint. My legs took over before my mind could argue. Branches whipped at my arms like the forest was trying to hold me back. The beam from my flashlight jerked wildly, stretched shadows into monstrous forms that reached for my throat. Breath burned in my chest as if the cold night air was turning to ice inside me. Something large crashed through the brush behind me. Not running, pursuing. Heavy, irregular steps like the ground recoiled every time it touched the earth. My boots pounded the trail, muscles screaming, heart stuttering in primal terror. The light from the RV was just ahead, soft as a candle through the trees, but enough to send a surge of hope tearing through my fear. I burst into the clearing, shoes sliding in pine needles, and hurled myself inside the RV, slamming the door behind me. Silence dropped like a stone. I stood there, chest heaving, listening to my pulse hammer against the inside of my skull. The world outside held its breath, and for one agonizing moment, I wondered if I imagined everything. The whispers, the footprints, the things standing behind me at the cliff. Then something pressed gently against the side of the RV, a single deliberate tap. Metal vibrated under the touch. My skin prickled. That tap was too calm, too confident, like it knew it didn't need to rush me, like it understood time was on its side. I backed further into the RV, switching off the flashlight to keep from revealing my position. Darkness wrapped around me, but it felt safer than light. Light could leak through the windows, might draw whatever stalked me to where I stood. My hand found the handle of a kitchen drawer and closed around a heavy wrench. Cold steel grounded me, even if only a little. Another tap, higher this time. Closer to the window. Tap, tap. I swallowed hard, careful not to breathe too loud. My mind replayed the ranger's warning. Does anyone know where you're going? At the time, I thought he cared. Now I wondered if he was afraid, not for me, but of me, afraid of what I'd disturb. The tapping stopped. Silence again. But silence here wasn't empty. It was listening. I could have waited until daylight, locked the doors, curled up in the back, pretended nothing had happened. But staying still made the fear worse. The forest had taken people, good people, and maybe it was about to take me too. Maybe that's what happened. A curiosity stronger than reason, a tiny step too far off trail, a whisper convincing you to follow. I had to see. Slowly, I crept toward the nearest window, fingers trembling as I peeled back the curtain a mere inch. The woodland shadows stood motionless, thick as velvet. My eyes strained to separate tree from threat. Then, through the corner of the glass, something moved. A silhouette, tall, too tall, limbs long and contorted like a human body that had forgotten how humans stood, shoulders hunched forward, head angled unnaturally to the side. It didn't pace, it didn't sniff, it watched. Its stillness was the most inhuman thing I'd ever seen. My breath hitched. Even from 20 feet away, I felt its attention like a hand on my chest. A cold, pressing fascination. It shifted slightly, revealing more of its shape. There was something on its face, stripes of pale color, almost glowing, lines that resembled paint or scars or both. They formed patterns I'd seen once before in a missing persons report. I had memorized that detail without meaning to, because that was the last clue anyone ever found of a lost hiker, a man named Trevor Mason. Smears of chalky white across a tree trunk, drawn in 4 straight lines across a circle. Search teams assumed it was weathering or vandalism, but seeing the same pattern carved onto this thing's face, he didn't make that mark. He became it. The creature, and I had to call it a creature, no other word fit in my mind anymore, lifted its head as if hearing a sound too quiet for me to notice. It stepped closer. My stomach flipped. One more step, and the moonless night revealed its legs, wrongly jointed, bending backward like a deer's, but ending in a wide, human-like foot. A hybrid of evolution that should never have existed. Another step. It was halfway across the clearing now. Its movement was eerily fluid, silent except for the faintest drag behind each stride, the same dragging mark the footprints left near the ravine. I stumbled away from the window, pulse thrashing as if trying to tear free of my veins. I didn't know if it had seen me, but I couldn't assume safety. I needed to leave. Now. My keys sat on the counter. I lunged for them, fingers fumbling clumsily as though fear had stolen my dexterity. The engine roared to life with a shaky turn of the ignition. Outside, the creature stopped. It turned its head, slowly, directly toward me. My headlights cut through the clearing as I flipped them on, and the light landed full on its face. It had eyes. They were human. Not once human. Human. Terrified. Pleading. As if someone was still alive inside that twisted form and begging me to run. I slammed the RV into drive and mashed the pedal to the floor. Tires spit dirt. Branches scraped the sides like claws. The entire vehicle shuddered as I tore down the uneven road. I didn't look in the mirrors. You only look behind you when part of you wants to know the truth. I wanted ignorance. I wanted the shape behind me to vanish from existence. The RV hit the main road hard, bouncing before stabilizing on asphalt. I didn't ease up until the forest was a shrinking shadow in the distance, and my lungs stopped shaking enough to breathe without feeling like I was drowning in adrenaline. When I finally pulled into a small clearing near a well-lit rest area miles later, I killed the engine and collapsed forward onto the steering wheel. The world spun. Tears I didn't remember summoning burned my eyes. I wasn't sure if I was crying from fear or from the hollow realization that part of me already wanted to go back, because there was one thing gnawing at me darker than any creature lurking in the woods. Something in that clearing wasn't a monster. Not fully. Not yet. And if what I saw was someone caught between two fates, then every missing hiker wasn't just gone. They were changing. And the forest wasn't done. A soft sound cracked through the quiet. A knock. From the back door of the RV, deliberate, hungry, 3 slow thuds, I froze. All the courage that had driven me into the woods drained from my limbs like blood withdrawing from a wound. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Wind, an animal, branches, but the pattern of the knocks crushed every excuse I invented. Knock, knock, knock. As if asking for permission to enter, I didn't move. Every muscle locked in place, tears drying, but fear still pouring fresh from some deep source inside me. The thing outside didn't try to force its way in. It just waited, listening, testing the boundaries of what it could take from me. After what felt like an hour, though the clock said only minutes, the knocking stopped. But the relief was temporary. A whisper slid beneath the doorframe. A voice shaped by a human tongue that no longer remembered how to speak. Follow. My body shook. Then silence. Nothing pressed against the metal. Nothing paced. Nothing breathed. But through the thin RV wall, I sensed it. Still there. Still close. Patient as hunger. I didn't sleep. Not even for a moment. Dawn finally stretched across the sky like a lifeline thrown from heaven itself. Only then did I risk stepping outside. The ground around the RV was disturbed. Strange prints circled the vehicle, deep, heavy. But there was something else too. A message carved into the dirt with long clawed fingers. Do not come back. I wanted to listen. God, I wanted to forget the ravine, the footsteps, the face with terrified human eyes. But then I remembered why I came. Those missing hikers, their families, their unanswered questions. And I couldn't let fear silence truth, because the truth is that some people go missing out there. It's that the forest chooses them. And something in those ancient moss-covered shadows is learning how to choose better. I stayed at that rest area longer than I'd like to admit, staring at the message etched into the dirt. Do not come back. It should have been enough to stop anyone with even a scrap of common sense. But common sense is something the forest erodes over time. It whispers doubts into it. It manipulates it. And if you've ever felt a calling, something bigger than fear, you know that warnings sometimes do the opposite. For most people, terror ends when daylight arrives. Mine only sharpened. I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. Human eyes inside something that shouldn't have been human. A twisted transformation. A survivor who wasn't saved. I thought about the hikers whose photos lined the bulletin boards at every trailhead. Smiling faces frozen in time. Families still hopeful someone would stumble upon them, injured but alive. What if some of them had been found? Just not in a way anyone could understand. The ranger. His unease. His questions. The way he hesitated before letting me drive off into the woods. He knew something. And now I needed to know too. So, after a few hours of restless pacing and heart-pounding hesitation, I climbed back into the driver's seat and headed toward the ranger station. The forest stretched on both sides of the highway, tall pines watching me pass like a jury that had already made its decision. Every mile deeper I went felt like I was burrowing back into the throat of a predator that had let me escape only to enjoy the chase. When I parked in front of the wooden outpost building, morning light washed everything gold, but the beauty here always felt like a disguise. The ranger, a man in his 50s with sunken eyes and a beard that hadn't been trimmed in weeks, stepped out onto the porch. The moment he saw me, his face fell. "You came back," he said flatly. I nodded, feeling foolish and determined at the same time. "I need answers," I said, "about the missing, about what's happening in those woods." He looked over my shoulder, scanning the empty road behind me, and motioned me inside quickly. The door shut with a loud click, and he locked it immediately. That sound, the eagerness in his hands as he turned the bolt, sent a cold tremor up my spine. Inside, maps of Oregon's forests covered the walls, markers, circles. Red pins clustering around specific regions like infections spreading under the skin of the state. More than I expected. More than I could even count. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Those hikers you're looking for, they didn't get lost." I waited. They were lured. The room seemed to shrink around me. My heartbeat echoed louder than the words. Lured by what? I asked, though I already felt the shape of the answer lurking behind my ribs. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked to a tall metal filing cabinet and slid out a drawer that screeched like an injured animal. From inside, he withdrew a folder labeled "Cases Not for Release." He opened to a page filled with black and white photos. Footprints, the same dragging pattern I saw at the ravine. A tent torn open, exactly like the one in the abandoned campsite. Symbols, those white stripes across a tree trunk, the same ones on the creature's face. And then this one froze my blood. A security camera still from this very ranger station. A figure standing just outside the window at night, staring in. Long limbs, twisted posture, head tilted, human eyes, same as the one that followed me. My throat tightened. "What are they?" The ranger shut the folder and squeezed it under his arm as if afraid it might escape his grasp. "People who followed the wrong thing." His voice shook, not from fear of the creatures, but fear of speaking about them. "They mimic voices," he said. "Memories, familiar shapes. Some say they can take your form if you let them close enough. This didn't start as a legend. Legends grew from survivors." "Survivors?" I repeated, hope flickering. His expression hardened. "Not the kind worth saving." My stomach nodded as a realization surfaced, horrific and logical. Missing hikers aren't taken to be eaten. They're taken to become something else, something useful, something hunting the next one. "They want you," he added quietly. Every instinct screamed denial. But the knocking, the whisper, follow, the message telling me not to come back, written by something that still remembered language enough to warn me. I think someone out there is still alive inside, I said, picturing those eyes again, pleading, furious, terrified. The ranger's jaw clenched. If a person survives transformation long enough to fight, they can resist the forest for a while, but not forever. And if you get close enough to help them, his voice faltered, you'll wish you hadn't. A shiver crawled down my spine like an unseen insect. But why me? I whispered. Because the creature chose me? Because I looked back when I should have run? He stared at me like I already knew the answer. You went where no one should. You looked into a place that doesn't let go. I felt dizzy, like the forest had attached something invisible to me. A mark, a calling card, a connection. The ranger sighed, as though carrying a weight too heavy to share. Oregon has thousands of miles of forest where no one watches. Do you know what that means? It means the forest can feed quietly. His voice broke on the word feed, not like prey, like conversion. And you're thinking of going back, he said, not a question, but a dreadful certainty. My silence answered for me. He closed his eyes, shoulders slumping. If you do, he said, bring a rope, not to climb with. His stare cut into mine like a blade. To tie yourself to the world you're leaving behind. His meaning was clear. Tie yourself to sanity, to humanity, to something that doesn't whisper in the dark. But some part of me was already beyond that. A part that couldn't drive away knowing that behind the tree line, people like Trevor Mason were begging through borrowed eyes. The ranger handed me a worn topographic map, several areas shaded in deep black. Places where missing hikers were last seen. Don't follow lights, he warned. Don't answer voices. And whatever you do, he leaned in close, breath trembling. Don't look down the ravines. My pulse thundered, because I already had, and something down there had looked back. I stuffed the map into my jacket, nodded silently, and walked out into the daylight, knowing the next sunset would find me again at the edge of the unknown. The forest didn't have to roar. It only had to whisper, and tonight it would whisper my name. I left the ranger station with the map folded tight in my fist, its creases biting into my palm. The sun was bright, too bright. It made the forest seem almost harmless, deceptively peaceful. But every time the wind shifted through the pines, I felt watched, not by a predator, but by something patient, something that remembered me. I stood beside my RV, hand hovering over the door handle, caught in that razor-thin line between running from fear and chasing it. The sensible part of me, the human part, begged to drive far, far away. But the faces of those missing hikers haunted me more deeply than any creature ever could. Their families still prayed for closure. Even a grim truth was better than endless uncertainty. I thought of those eyes again, human eyes trapped inside a nightmare's body, desperate, afraid, still fighting. How many of the missing were suffering like that, caught in a war between the person they once were and the monster the forest wanted them to become. I couldn't abandon them. I wouldn't. By the time the sun dipped toward the horizon, I had already driven back to the same entrance road. The sign for the abandoned trailhead stood crooked, moss consuming the carved letters like it was trying to erase human presence altogether. The ranger's words echoed in my skull, bring a rope. I had one looped around my chest, coiled and ready, along with everything else I hoped I wouldn't need. A flare gun, a hunting knife, and enough cowardice to know I wasn't invincible. I killed the engine. The forest inhaled the silence. I stepped out. The moment my boots hit dirt, the temperature dropped. The air felt heavier, humid with a strange scent I hadn't noticed before, like wet stone and rotten leaves. The smell of places sunlight never touches. Dusk bled into the sky like a wound slowly reopening. I walked with careful, measured steps, flashlight off to keep attention low. Only a dim headlamp hugged to my forehead, pointed at the trail ahead. My breath fogged as if the night was pulling heat straight out of me. The rope around my torso felt strangely comforting, a reminder I still belonged to the world outside these trees. As I approached the clearing where the dead campsite waited, A crow cawed sharply above, its cry breaking the quiet like a snapped bone. I flinched, irrational shame tightening my chest. Fear didn't care that I was grown, skilled, determined. It just wanted to remind me I could still feel like prey. The clearing appeared through the darkness. The collapsed tent hadn't changed. The scattered cans still glinted faintly, but the footprints, they were gone, wiped clean. As if the forest had repaired the evidence of its hunger, the ground looked freshly disturbed, smoothed over deliberately. Something didn't want me following the trail again. A soft vibration reached me, deep, distant. At first, I thought it was my heart, but the ground itself trembled under my boots. A rhythmic thrum rising from beneath the earth, like something breathing in the caverns below. I turned my headlamp off. If the forest wanted darkness, I wouldn't pretend light could protect me. My eyes adjusted slowly. Moonlight filtered weakly through the canopy, casting thin silver beams on the ravine edge ahead. The same drop, the same abyss, the same place the prince had vanished into last night. But something was different. A rope, thick, frayed, and knotted, dangled over the edge, as if someone had climbed down or been pulled. Hope and dread collided violently in my chest. Someone might be down there, alive. Against every instinct screaming to stay far away, I crept to the edge and peered into the void. The drop seemed twice as deep as before. Darkness moved below, not swirling like mist, but shifting, crawling. I attached my own rope around the thick trunk of a cedar tree, securing it with trembling knots. My breaths came shallow, more from panic than exertion. Before I descended, I whispered under my breath, maybe to the missing, maybe to myself, "I'm coming to get you." My boots pressed against the dirt wall as I lowered myself inch by inch, pebbles dislodged, clicking down the cliff like bones falling into a pit. Halfway down, the rope began to sway, too intentionally. Not from wind. Something brushed my calf. I froze. A hand, a human hand, cold and trembling, gripped my boot. My blood iced over. I angled my headlamp down just as a face lifted into the beam. Not a monster, a man, skin pale as chalk, cheekbones sharp, lips cracked and dry. But his eyes, God, his eyes, alive and wild with terror. He whispered hoarsely, voice shredded, "Don't let go." Below him, another set of arms wrapped around his waist. They didn't belong to someone human. Claws dug into his ribs, a gaping mouth pressed against his lower spine, teeth scraping cloth and skin. The creature beneath him clung like a parasite trying to drag its prey into the earth. I reached for him, tried to grab his wrist, tried to pull. But he shook his head violently, choking out a single command, "Run." An inhuman screech tore upward from the dark, and the man was yanked away, ripped from the rope, his scream slicing the night before, vanishing into suffocating black. The rope jerked hard, nearly pulling me loose. I scrambled, desperately climbing, gravel cutting my palms, boots slipping, panic turning my limbs useless. Something below hit the cliff wall with a grotesque crunch, followed by the wet rip of flesh tearing against stone. Claws scraped rock, ascending. Faster than me, I lunged for the top edge just as fingers, long, bone-like razor-tipped, swiped above my heel. The strike missed by inches. I threw myself forward, rolling hard onto the forest floor. Silence returned, but not the kind that meant safety, the kind that meant the predator was thinking. My chest heaved, my rope now dangled untouched beneath me, swaying like bait over the abyss. Then from below, a whisper. Not the unknown voice from before. My own. Follow. The word echoed off the cliff walls, twisted into something mocking, something triumphant, something that had tasted fear and wanted more. I stumbled backward, pulse exploding painfully in my ribcage. The forest around me shivered as though hundreds of unseen eyes blinked open at once. Somewhere in those shifting shadows, people were still alive, somewhere deeper. They wouldn't be for long. I ran, not away this time, but toward whatever truth the forest thought I was too weak to face. I'm not done. Not until the missing are found. Not until I drag the forest's secrets into the light. Not until I learn whether the human souls trapped inside those twisted forms can still be saved. And I promise you this, if I don't come back, don't come looking, because by then, it won't be me you're trying to find. The forest changed the moment I made that vow. The trees seemed to straighten, closing ranks like soldiers preparing for siege. The darkness between their trunks deepened, even though moonlight should have cut through it. Everything felt coordinated, no longer passive wilderness. This was a territory protecting itself, and it saw me as a threat. My pulse hammered inside my skull as I stumbled forward, the rope still hanging from my torso, its loose end dragging behind me like a tether to sanity I had nearly lost. My flashlight jittered in my trembling hand, its beam slicing through mist that hadn't been there seconds earlier. The air thickened, damp, heavy, and full of a scent like rusted metal. Blood. I slowed. Every instinct I had left screaming don't, but terror had become my momentum now, pushing me deeper. My steps were soft, but the forest amplified them, each crunch of gravel, each brush of twig broadcasting exactly where I was. The silence felt intelligent, a trap waiting to spring. As I crept forward, the path split into multiple game trails, each one narrowing into blackness. The map the ranger gave me pulsed through my memory, shaded zones where hikers vanished far from any recognized trail, and I heard his voice again. Tie yourself to the world you're leaving behind. I unwound the rope, anchored it tightly around another tree. It wasn't much, but it was a line back, a proof I existed before the forest swallowed me. The distant thrum beneath the earth returned, slower now, a heart beating underground. But this time another sound joined it, breathing. Not mine, wet, ragged, too close. I swung the flashlight toward the noise. Something ducked out of the beam, swift and low, a smear of pale shape disappearing behind a log. My dry mouth opened, but no sound came out. The creature below the ravine had climbed. It was here. But the breathing wasn't coming from there. It was above me. A figure crouched among the branches overhead, limbs bent at impossible angles, but not watching me like prey, watching me like a prisoner watches a rescuer. The face was gaunt, jaw too wide, eyes sunken and lightless except for a tiny flicker of memory. It was broken and desperate. Help! The voice was strained, warped by a throat that no longer belonged to a human, but I recognized the plea. A remnant still trapped inside. The branch bowed under its weight. One fang protruded from its lip, dripping thick strands of dark saliva. It reached out, not clawing, reaching. And behind me, branches cracked, a heavier thing stalking closer. Two different monsters, two different stages of transformation. The one above wanted saving. The one behind me wanted something else entirely. I backed toward the tree I'd tied the rope to, pulse wild and confused. Should I help the creature above? Could I? Would touching it mean death or worse? The one in the shadows behind snarled, a wet, guttural rumble that vibrated my sternum. Fight or flight. Neither felt like survival. I turned slowly, keeping both in peripheral sight. My flashlight beam finally landed on the second creature emerging between two massive pines. It stood upright, taller than before, stretched. Skin dark and cracked like bark splitting in winter frost. Teeth long and thin as pine needles jutted unevenly from its mouth. Lines on its face glowed faintly, those same white shapes from the missing hiker case photos. But what made bile rise in my throat wasn't the deformity. It was the expression. Panic, fear. Like someone inside was screaming silently for mercy. Its jaw clenched hard, a tremor running through its limbs as if fighting itself, struggling not to lunge, not to obey the forest's hunger. In that instant, I understood. This creature wasn't hunting me of its own will. It was trying to stop me from going any deeper. Then its eyes flashed, ember-like, no longer human. The forest took control. It roared and charged. I fired the flare gun. A blazing comet streaked through the dark, striking its shoulder. It shrieked as fire kissed its skin, but the flames sputtered quickly, smothered by damp bark like flesh. The creature stumbled, off balance, and in that gap of hesitation, the figure from the trees dropped onto its back. The two tangled violently, snarls and gasps and gnarled limbs thrashing. This wasn't an attack out of malice. It was one tortured soul sacrificing what was left of itself to protect me. Their struggle bought me seconds, nothing more. "Thank you," I whispered, voice quivering. Then I turned and ran. The rope guided me back through the dense dark like a lifeline. the knots scraping my side as I shoved branches away. The screeching behind me escalated, metallic and furious as the creatures battled. But then a third sound cut through everything. Laughter. Not joyful, not sane. Human laughter, distorted to the breaking point, reverberating from deeper in the woods. A chorus of voices layered together, like multiple throats in one body. Choked. Forced. Suffering. The transformed were calling to one another, and they knew I was here. I nearly tripped when the rope tightened, my tree anchor reached. I paused only long enough to sever it with my knife and loop the coil over my shoulder again. I would need it ahead because this night was far from done. I continued further into the unmarked territory, toward the darkest area on the ranger's map. The laughter died away, but the heartbeat beneath the ground grew stronger. The earth vibrated through my boots in steady, pulsing rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Soon I reached a clearing where the moonlight revealed dozens of stones half buried in moss. At first, I thought they were tomb markers, but when I wiped one clean, my body locked up. It wasn't a gravestone. It was a backpack. Multiple backpacks. Piles of them, years old. Zippers rusted, fabric bleached, every one of them belonging to someone who vanished into these woods. I dropped to my knees, breathing shakily as I brushed aside leaves, revealing a patch of cloth embroidered with a name I recognized, Trevor Mason, the man whose eyes I saw inside the creature last night. My vision blurred. Rage and grief collided inside me. Something behind me shifted. I turned slowly. Figures, 10, maybe more, stood at the tree line. Not moving, not chasing, watching. Their shapes varied, some still vaguely human, some bent into grotesque silhouettes that cast impossible shadows. Their white face markings glowed like symbols of a cult I wish didn't exist. One stepped forward, its jaw opened, not in hunger, in warning. Go, it rasped, each letter mangled by a throat that barely remembered speech. Back. My adrenaline surged cold and sharp. Their hostility had shifted. They didn't want me deeper, not because they were protecting themselves, but because the worst was ahead, and the forest didn't want me to see it. I lifted my headlamp beam and aimed it past them, deeper into the abyss-like trail. The ground ahead sloped downward into a vast hollow, an ancient sinkhole where roots twisted like ribs protecting a heart. And there were lights. Hundreds of pale orbs floating just above the earth, shifting, forming patterns that looked like invitations carved from light. Eyes. Not human, not creature, something older. The forest's true face. Every instinct told me that stepping forward meant losing myself. That once I crossed that threshold, I'd join the missing, not as a victim, but as their replacement in whatever the forest was building. But another instinct, the one that kept me from fleeing last night, pulsed stronger. If I left now, I'd leave them here forever. Families would keep waiting. Hikers would keep disappearing. The forest would keep claiming souls. I stepped forward. The creatures hissed, some in fear, some in fury, but none dared cross the invisible line into that hollow. This path was meant for me. My heart pounded to match the rhythm of the pulsing earth. My vision sharpened as adrenaline overrode sense. The forest whispered. Not a threat, not a warning, a welcome. And as I crossed into the hollow, I understood I wasn't chasing the truth anymore. The truth had been chasing me. And now, it had me exactly where it wanted. Night swallowed the trail behind me. There was no turning back now. The hollow ahead was shaped like a vast bowl carved into the earth. A hidden world beneath the forest floor where light seemed to die before touching the ground. The air here felt electrically alive, vibrating with a tension that made my teeth ache. Fog slithered low, and every step I took sank into soil damp enough to feel like flesh. The drifting white orbs, the eyes, floated closer as I advanced. They weren't fireflies, they weren't lanterns. They seemed independent of the air itself, as if they hung from invisible threads. The closer I got, the more they flickered, responsive, observing, curious. A shape emerged from the far end of the hollow, massive, hunched, and still as a root-entangled boulder. Its back rose and fell in slow, heavy movements, each breath stirring the mist like a tide turning. When its head lifted, the mist parted enough for my light to graze the outline of staggering antlers, not like an elk's, but gnarled and spiraled like dead branches twisted by storms over centuries. It blended with the forest because it was the forest, a guardian or a warden or something without human equivalence. It didn't acknowledge me with eyes or teeth or sound. It simply existed, effortlessly terrifying in its indifference. It wasn't the hunter, it was the jailer. The sound began then, a low, harmonic hum vibrating the very air from above me. I spun around. Figures descended the slope surrounding the hollow. Dozens, maybe 100. More than I'd ever imagined missing. Some still wore remnants of human clothing fused into flesh. Others barely resembled anything human anymore. Spines too long, legs bending at impossible backward angles, faces stretched smooth like skin, resisting transformation by clinging to memory. They circled the hollow, not advancing, forming a living barricade. Then one moved toward me, staggering forward like each step fought an internal war. Its voice was a shredded whisper that still carried unmistakable agony. You shouldn't have come. I recognized the remnants of his jacket, a trail patch sewn to the torn shoulder. Trevor Mason, his lips peeled back as he strained against invisible chains in his muscles. They don't let you leave. Not when you've seen. He pointed a clawed finger upward. The crawling hum intensified above us. That's when I noticed them, silhouettes among the treetops. Clinging, watching, bodies fused into bark, limbs curling with vines, faces partially swallowed by moss. Rangers, former rangers maybe, eye sockets signed with glowing streaks, sentinels for the forest's hunger. Trevor's next words quaked through his disjointed jaw. The heart. The ground pulsed beneath me. A booming thud like something massive deep below slammed against the earth in confinement. The sinkhole was not just a hollow, it was a lung, a stomach, a birthplace, and whatever it protected was waking. Roots nearby strained against soil, twitching like tendons flexing. The earth bulged, swollen, as if bones pushed upward beneath it. The missing hikers surrounding the hollow began to sway, unified in a sick rhythm. Some clawed their own flesh, fighting the pulse. Others trembled with something resembling joy, like zealots at a sermon. Their eyes locked on me, wide, unblinking, pleading for rescue and praying I'd join them. A voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere, layered in hundreds of tones, old as the dirt itself. Follow. Not spoken, implanted. My knees buckled. I clutched the rope around my chest, knuckles white, the only reminder I still belonged above ground. Trevor's claws dug crescent moons into the soil. Leave. Before it. A violent spasm racked him. His spine arched back so far I thought it would snap. Then he screamed. Not a human scream. A chorus of screams. His body convulsed and jerked downward like the earth had hooked him, dragging him to his knees. When he looked up again, the human flicker in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by hollow obedience. He had lost. The jailer, that antlered titan, took a single step forward. The ground shook. Mist recoiled. Its presence rewrote the rules of nature as it moved. The circle of the transformed tightened. My pulse roared in my head. I stumbled backward, breathing fast and shallow. The rope. I grabbed the loose end at my belt, tied to the tree far behind. My exit, my tether home. I planted my feet, ready to sprint for my life, but the ground beneath me suddenly tilted. No, not tilted, sank. The sinkhole opened like a monstrous yawn. I dropped, sliding down a slope of mud and roots. Nails tore into my palms, trying to catch anything to stop the descent. My body twisted. The rope snapped taut, biting into my ribs, halting me inches from falling into the chasm. Below me, darkness as deep as graves older than humanity. From inside the abyss, hands reached up, dozens of them. Pale arms stretching like weeds, desperate for sunlight. Nails clicking against stone, skin peeling, fingers clawing for new flesh. Every one of them used to be someone. My rope creaked, threads straining. One hand brushed my boot. Time slowed. Every instinct screamed, cut the rope or be dragged down forever. But cutting it meant losing my way out, losing my humanity's last symbol. Another voice from the hole, broken, begging, not the monster's, a woman's. I'm still here. Please. Her voice wavered like a radio signal breaking through static. She sounded terrified. She sounded alive. The rope fibers began to snap one by one. The transformed ringed the edge above, staring down with hollow reverence, waiting for the earth to claim its next servant. The antlered warden leaned over, shadow swallowing what little sanity I clung to. A choice. Abandon the rope, fall into hell, try to rescue those trapped inside, or cut it loose first and run while there was still a world above to run toward. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear slipped into the cut on my cheek, burning like acid. I heard my mother's voice, a memory from childhood, warning me never to go into the woods alone. I heard the ranger's earlier whisper, terrified, urging me to tie myself to the world I belonged to. I heard the creature's stolen voice, taunting, offering the one word I feared and craved, follow. The rope gave a loud final pop, its last strands ready to fail. I could save myself, or I could save them. I made my decision. I didn't cut the rope. I wrapped both arms around it and pulled, not away from the abyss, up, toward life, toward the surface, toward hope. The rope screamed under the strain, fibers fraying against bark, my ribs bruising with every upward lurch. Hands clawed my boots, but I kicked away, scrambling, climbing with every ounce of terror-forged strength left inside me. Above, the transformed shrieked in a frenzied uproar, some in fury, some in anguish. They wanted me back in the darkness. They needed me to fall. They reached and snapped and snarled, but that they didn't cross the invisible line. They couldn't. This chasm wasn't their domain. It was a prison for the ones still resisting change. And I had just robbed the forest of a new prisoner. The rope jerked upward, as if someone else was pulling from above, dragging me higher than my own strength could manage. A gasp of breath escaped me. Someone alive was helping. And then, hands grabbed my forearms, rough and familiar. The ranger's face appeared over the edge, strained and wild with fear. "I told you not to look into the ravines," he snarled through clenched teeth. "You don't want what's down there." He hauled me up onto solid ground, my body collapsing against cold earth. But there was no time for relief. The transformed were closing in again, teeth bared, claws flexed, torn between serving the forest and protecting me. The antlered warden took one more colossal step, the ground buckling beneath its weight. A low moan rolled from its chest, an ancient warning. It was forbidding them from interfering, from blocking me, from leaving. The ranger yanked the rope loose with a single desperate pull and shoved me toward the woods. "Run!" I didn't need to be told twice. We sprinted, branches tearing at our clothes, roots grabbing our feet, the entire forest shaking with fury. Behind us, the warden bellowed, a bone-rattling roar that promised this wasn't finished. The transformed echoed with shrieks that clawed at the air, growing distant as the rope of survival dragged us closer to freedom. Trees thinned, light flickered. The outline of my RV appeared through the canopy like salvation wrapped in dented metal. We burst out of the tree line just as something titanic slammed into the ground behind us, too close. The RV rattled from the force. A low, seismic growl pressed at our spines. I lunged into the driver's seat, the ranger diving into the passenger side. I turned the key, engine roaring to life, headlights flaring bright. My tires spit mud and rock as we tore down the road, the forest clawing at the rear windows as if trying to drag us backward by sheer will. We didn't speak. Adrenaline was language enough. Only when the highway lights finally appeared up ahead did the ranger let out a single, broken whisper. "You're marked now." I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles bleaching white. "What does that mean?" He stared through the windshield into the night that still hunted us. "It means the forest remembers you. It knows you don't belong to it yet, and it wants to finish what it started." Silence bruised the air between us. "And those people, down there?" I asked, voice shaking with more than exhaustion. The ranger looked at me then, eyes raw with an unbearable truth. "They're still alive," he said, "but not for long." I swallowed the surge of emotion that threatened to choke me. Rage, terror, helplessness, hope. "There has to be a way to save them," I said, not as a question, but as a vow. The ranger exhaled, shoulders trembling. If there is, you're not doing it alone. We rode in silence the rest of the way, two men bound by knowledge no one should ever have to carry. When I finally parked under the orange glow of a highway rest stop, the ranger gave me one last steady look. "Don't go back into those woods tonight," he said, "or tomorrow, or ever again." He opened the door and stepped out into the light. "But one day," he added, turning back to hold my gaze, "we're going to finish this." Then he walked away, back toward the station, back toward duty, back toward the truth that waited beneath the trees. I sat alone now, engine ticking softly as it cooled. The forest of Oregon stretched behind me, a black monolith against the sky, a living hunger, a memory keeper. I thought about the whisper from the abyss. "I'm still here, please." I thought about Trevor's eyes, once full of adventure, now drowning in nightmare. I thought about the way the antlers scraped the stars and the hundreds of pale orbs watching from below ground, and I made myself a promise. I will return. Not tonight. Not unprepared. Not alone. But someday, armed with knowledge, strength, and enough light to drown out the deepest roots of that darkness, I will go back, because no one should be forgotten in that forest, and because fear doesn't win unless we stop fighting. If you're listening to this, if you ever decide to camp in Oregon's national forests, stay close, stay aware, stay human. And if you hear a voice calling from the ravine below, don't look down, don't follow, don't even answer, because the missing are waiting, and they don't want to wait alone.